Welcome everyone, Simon here from the Whales of Wall Street. We have a Vechain video for you guys today, VET on the exchange. This is a project I've been holding for a few years now in the portfolio. Vechain is actually something that came to my attention through Cheeky Crypto, the YouTube channel. The guys there are fantastic and they brought that to the attention. But for me, I was quite excited because of that supply chain management aspect of it. And particularly with the fact personally I've been working in that industry or those areas for a number of years. So I understand very well the supply chain management aspects, logistics, consumer electronics, forecasting, etc., credits, you name it. And I loved the idea that, of course, through blockchain technology, we have a multitude of things that can be provided as a solution for many of the issues or problems or difficulties that those industries and sectors hold at the moment or have done for a while. But it's interesting because around June or July time this year, for those that don't know, there was a patent going through from Vechain, which orientates themselves around not just supply chain, but enters areas of finance, insurance, potentially real estate. And it does go hand in hand, really. I think what you're going to see is a lot of these chains out there that have been around for a number of years, they may have had like maybe a focused goal, but actually maybe the realization now as development occurs and, resource within the teams, focus on various different areas, they broaden the horizon and they have the ability to go down these extra paths. So whilst it's always nice to sometimes see chains that are just dedicated to one focal channel, the fact is that Vechain does have a capability of holding itself in regard to multiple sectors and industries. So we're going to go on to that in a bit more detail. Before we do, don't forget, of course, to check out the other videos on the channel. Last time we spoke about Vechain was a few weeks ago. Very interesting topic around the pet industry and how Vechain was pushing itself in that area as well with VTags. So go check that one out. It's very interesting. And yes, a multitude of different topics, discussions we always go through on this channel. And of course, if you haven't done so, smash that subscribe button. And obviously hit that big thumbs up as well so we can spread education further around Web3 and blockchain. Thank you for joining the channel. We're over 12,000 subs now, which is absolutely fantastic. So thanks so much for your support. Now let's go into this topic in a bit more detail. So this is relating to V3TR. This is the trademark option or application, if you like. Some would call it a patent, but I think it is, to be honest, more so a trademark element. And it was devised around July time, just gone in this year. So I think the filing date 19th of July 2023. Now we kind of know what Vechain is about. It covers a multitude of different areas. So I'm not going to read all these out. I think they're quite self-explanatory. But it's this bit that interests me the most. Now, I've been following this for a while, but it came to my mindset as I was doing an XTC video yesterday. I mentioned something about insurance in trade finance, or just in general. And insurance in general is absolutely gigantic as a market, as a valuation. We'll go into some statistics in a minute to identify like why this is so interesting if Vechain does go down this route and why it's so applicable as a chain to orientate itself in this area. But yes, insurance in general covering so many aspects, and the fact that blockchain can really provide massive solutions to potentially things like fraud or the processing of payments or indeed real-time insurance quotes and things like this. And we'll go into that a bit more detail as well because there's obviously a huge link up there with supply chain and logistics in general. So this going through is absolutely interesting, and there's not too much development since this application of Trademark has gone through, but the fact of the matter is that these identifiable keywords here, insurance, financial affairs in general, of course, monetary affairs, real estate affairs, and insurance with financial affairs, all of those included within that. So you've got financial affairs in general and of course the aspect of insurance on there too. Why is this interesting? Well, for me personally, understanding a bit more about the insurance market was one of the fundamental things that I started doing really since the TFDI event that I went to a few months ago. Never really orientated my mindset around the insurance capability within blockchain and the Web3 space. And of course, with insurance companies like Allianz were present, Legal in General were present at this event. And I was listening to them. And there wasn't at the beginning of the conferences too much interaction with what's the insurance link to blockchain. But as soon as I started understanding the mechanism of insurance within the trade finance industry, let alone real estate and things like this, but It's absolutely staggering numbers. And then I started hearing things like crop insurance and logistical machinery insurance. And I thought, of course that makes sense. You've got a $19 trillion market there in general for trade finance. But then within that structure, you got humongous numbers of monetary value. I mean, just supply chain management globally is going to be around $45 billion worth by 2027. Who knows what it would be by 2030 when all this kicks in, especially with electronic trade documents and things passing through as law, etc. The MLETR aspects, the ISO 222 compliance, all these things are coming in right now and are being worked on right now. They're being used. Utility is there. And the blockchain interaction just with supply chain management stands potentially around about $4 billion worth. So percentage wise, it's roughly 10% at the moment. That will grow. And so will artificial insurance integration and all those other aspects that we mentioned earlier in this evolution of what's going on with trade finance. Now that's just supply chain management. You've got things like the machinery aspects, the actual physical machinery or transportation aspects. You've got people that obviously need to be insured, especially out at sea or on planes, etc. And things like crop insurance. Now, can you believe this? Like, I couldn't believe it when I was like reading through some of this stuff over the last couple of months since that event that I went to, and I've got it written down here. So crop insurance, just for a bit of context here, is essentially when someone who's harvesting or creating crops, whether it's wheat or barley, whatever the commodity is, and let's say, for example, you've got your supply and demand aspects here. So you've got a forecast of orientation around information as to when we need to seed things and harvest things throughout the year based on demand around the world or regionalization of wherever those crops are going. And in some instances, I mean, there's a great example, I think a year or so ago in France, with the vineyards and things, where the crops of grapes, etc., just didn't work because the climate change and everything going on, whatever you believe or don't believe in climate change, this instance happened where the crops just weren't growing. So the whole yield of that year was lost. And ultimately, there's a cost association to that. There's a cost to the business for the loss of money or the revenue that could have been generated from that. And then you've got the loss from the insurance market, because the insurance company, assuming they were insured, I don't know, but they would pay out, obviously, for that loss of revenue, or maybe partial, if not 100%. I don't know that aspect of it as well. But then, of course, the catalyst of that is, as premiums get paid out, everyone thinks it's great because we get our money paid for. But ultimately, we pay the sacrifice of exerted premiums. And that tends to spread out across the globe as well, in the sense that what happens over here affects me over here, even though I haven't claimed or anything for however many years or never at all. That's just how the world works. Same with car insurance. The insurance prices are going up and up here in the UK. I'm sure they are globally. And you sit scratching your head, you're like, well, I haven't had any accidents. Why am I paying more? Because there's things like premiums, fraudulent activity, and interest rates kicked on top of that as well. So you're paying double, if not triple in some instances, for insurance. And you're sitting there going, how is this even possible? And it's kind of like that snowball effect. So yeah, $61 billion crop insurance market value. That is absolutely phenomenal. And again, like when you hear about these concepts, you're like, oh, crop insurance, that's interesting. But as an investor's perspective, and starting looping around why blockchain is important to this, when you start hearing those kind of numbers, it's eye-opening, right? $61 billion is a lot of money. And from the crop insurance perspective, again, that's just one area of interest in the whole trade finance aspect. And what's blockchain got to do with this? Well, blockchain has, of course, I'm going to name three of the pillars, validation, processing, transparency. These are three critical areas of interest to essentially formulate things where potentially, and the utilization of artificial intelligence is a prime example here, of having insurance premiums based on real-time data, potential impacts of environment, and all of these other variables that go on all the time. So rather than always guesswork or saying, oh, last year this happened, therefore premiums are going to be this year, it can be on a real-time basis. There's two arguments to the factor of whether that's a pro or a con, in the sense that it's kind of like a mortgage. If you've got a fixed rate, you know what you're anticipating. If you've got a tracker, it can go up and down depending on what's going on. But the ultimate factor here is that with that real-time data, or the ability to predict and the ability to have the transparency, the validation of things, those two bits we'll go into a bit more detail in a second, you start potentially diminishing the opportunity for mislaid information or miscalculated information when it comes to insurance quotes or premiums or payouts and things like this. And even to the point where if you are producing or creating manufacturing commodities or materials, whatever it is, again, that concept of what you're building has a real residual value rather than something that someone has just come in, done an audit and created an imaginary valuation in their minds. So us as consumers at the end level will get that full transparency. We'll see the entire journey. We'll see the entire infrastructure of what's going on and the things that we're buying with a QR code, which the likes of Vechain can provide that information that will be transparent, validated and processed. So when we're talking about things like ESG goals, climate change goals, all these things, we can make definitive conscious decisions about what we are buying and not buying, whether we're penalized for that or not, because that's coming, by the way, as it is with companies and banks right now. If you're not hitting certain ESG targets or you're manipulating your ESG content and narratives, you get heavily fined. And that will come down to the consumer level eventually as well. And that's why will probably be proposed the opportunity of things like play to earn, eat to earn, learn to earn, all this new economy to try and improve the way we do things, our behaviors, our exercise, all this stuff. It all links together. It's really fascinating when you deep dive into it. But going back to that point about blockchain's integration in this whole area, we know there's aspects of food traceability. We've talked about particularly the trade finance areas, but the trade finance area in itself is like $19 trillion. It's a huge market. We talked about supply chain. We talked about crop insurance. So it starts linking around. So you can start identifying, when we look back at this quick page here, as to why they might be interested in that particular notion around things like insurance, particularly insurance. And when we know that they already have a massive integration with the likes of supply chain management and other areas within trade finance, it starts making a lot more sense. And the fact that they've got the V4 token as well in terms of the fueling aspect of the chain as well, it really reduces the cost to companies and logistical companies around the world that want to start utilizing this. And there is a massive cost saving aspect to it as well, which we've mentioned as well in previous videos. We talked about how the introduction of electronic documents and things have sped up the process aspect, reducing resource, making things happen a lot quicker. It can speed up everything in this aspect. From the insurance perspective as well, from a cost aspect as well, we mentioned this. For every kind of like £1,000 that's involved in insurance, if there's a claim made or a battle or legalities within that, it can cost around the circa of £20,000 per claim. So we just see a definitive cost ourselves, but it goes back to that point that, let's say that gap of, even if we're conservative, let's say there's a gap of £15,000 or whatever that is in dollars, $18,000, something like this. That has to go somewhere. The insurance companies aren't just going to constantly pay out for that. It gets passed on, and that's why we have insurance premium rises and all these things. And imagine how much of that 20,000 is wasted on legalities, resource, time, lack of information, duplicate information. It can all be essentially removed out of the equation. And then ultimately that cost is reduced significantly, and that cost therefore is not passed on to us as users or banks or companies. So you start seeing a pattern of why this is such an industry solution that Vechain have at their ability, and why they're probably going into these areas because of the magnitude of the monetary values of these sectors and industries, but also the fact that there is a problem. There is a problem, and if you have a problem and you have a solution, go and put your solution in there, which is what Vechain has. There's loads of things within trade finance. You've got things like fake documents, fake or duplicate invoices, or inaccurate invoices, duplications. All of these things contribute to a significant proportion of mistakes and problems within the existing trade finance system. And even, guys, the food industry, I forgot to throw this number out, the food industry, it's like 30 billion euros worth. I don't know what that is in dollars off the top of my head, but that's a lot of money in relation to potential food traceability fraud and problems within food traceability and food in general in the trade finance aspect. It's absolutely massive. So we've got blockchain's ability here, not just from the transactions per second. I'm not just talking about financial transactions and talking about every action of transfer of action, which we've talked about a multitude of times on this channel. Electronic documents, the ownership aspect, the data aspect, and all of these aspects are part of the process element of blockchain. You've also got the validation, you've got the transparency. So there's all of these things where blockchain can be applied to in trade finance, but also from the insurance perspective, the credit aspect, insurance around credits, protecting exporters and importers, vice versa, the payment structures of this. If someone's not going to get paid, are they going to get their insurance claim out of it? And why was that payment not made? Because the creditor or the debitor has disappeared off the face of the earth. It was a fraudulent activity. This is where the huge cost of fraud is absolutely significant worldwide. I mean, the fraudulent number itself, I think, is around $8 billion worth of fraudulent activity is taken out of the global economy each year. And that's quite a phenomenal statistic, to be honest. And again, back to that point, we're the ones that essentially start paying for that, as do the companies who have done nothing wrong at all. They've been fully legitimate, but they're paying the price for all these things that go on. So we loop back around to why Vechain is such an important factor, is that it's got technology, it's got the ability to enter these markets. It has been very prominent in traceability, tagging, supply chain management, but now adding these areas, I didn't talk too much about real estate because we talk about that with the likes of property, the videos and things like that. The real estate market's trillions upon trillions of dollars as well, including the insurance aspects of real estate. But it's that whole now narrative, and I truly believe the next bull run will be critical areas of CBDC stablecoins and the frameworks behind them, regulation, and I could argue the third one would be around real world tokenization. So we're moving away from that NFT narrative into real world assets, physical assets turning into digital and vice versa. And Vechain has the capability of organizing the framework behind that. And also the whole entire spectrum of how these things get to us in the first place, the whole logistical supply chain aspect. So I think this is very exciting, and I think it's something to definitely look through in more detail, and keep an eye on this trademark as they potentially launch this. And I don't know how this formulates, whether it's part of a new arm to their company, or if it's just simply saying, we've got this technology and this framework available, no one can hopefully touch it. I mean, there's loads of chains out there that can boast this kind of ability. There's no doubt about it, but I'm just speaking on behalf of Vechain because I hold it. There's projects I don't hold and I talk about them on the channel, but for this one, I'm only talking about it because I have an understanding of the area and the industry. And this is down to you guys really to do your own research in these projects. But as I've always said on these videos, not just the projects, look at the industries and the sectors that they are within, but also identify what is this project or technology doing that will create a solution to a potential problem that exists in this industry and sector. And we've seen a multitude of them in the trade finance area. That's why there's a multi-trillion-dollar gap at the moment. And that gap formulates from a multitude of variable areas and elements, one of those of which is potential fraudulent activity and the insurance aspects as well, amongst a load of other things. So it's a really, really interesting topic, in my opinion, for Vechain. But on that point, as well from the investor's perspective, let's just have a quick look at the Vechain price in the chart. So we've got here a current price point of around 2.6, 2.7 cents. To put that in a bit of context, I'm just going to pull all the way back here. So I was getting involved with Vechain personally around in 2020, and I think it was roughly not too far off the current price, to be honest. I was buying some just under 1 cent. I didn't go gung-ho with it, and I really didn't take too much advantage at all of the bull run that we had in 2021. I mean, this is staggering, guys, and I pulled this one out before in a previous video. I'll leave it in there. But let's just put a new one in just for the sake of the conversation of where we can get to from now to the previous all-time high. So let me just get that. I'm always very poorly organized with this, aren't I? So the current price point around 2.8, 2.7 cents is roughly around here. All the way up to that previous all-time high, guys, is 891% gain from today's point. That's a really big gain. But there's the anticipation that we can potentially get to new higher levels. Now, in the previous videos, I'm just going to reiterate this really quickly before we talk about the macro aspects, is there's a definitive mindset that we should easily try to get towards that 44 or 50 cent mark. And that's not just because it's a rounded number, it's because in the fib levels here, this is a data point of interest. And it's certainly something we have to consider, the fact that we're going to have a bull cycle, but on top of that, we're going to have full utility and full integrations occurring. It's not 100% complete at this moment in time in 2024 and 2025. I do anticipate a huge cycle towards 2030. Whether or not as retail investors we're still allowed in the space or not remains to be seen. But 2025 will surely be a decent one. And I think with all those anticipations and those variables, that's definitely achievable. So we can start to see there's going to be an approximation of a 2,200% increase in the price point of Vechain from today's point. So if we take another look here at the next step upwards from that point, we're looking at around 3,700%. That's taking us up towards the 73 cent mark. There's a lot of talk out there that we'll get towards the dollar. I mean, absolutely that is possible, but I'm just being a bit conservative here in the sense that we do need to really hit some trigger points along the way upwards in the chart markets. But I do anticipate us to go smashing through that previous all-time high and into the higher spectrum. So there's plenty of movement in that vicinity for Vechain and the VET token to move up to those price points. We'll look at the existing data. I don't know why this happened on most of the charts. It has some weird blip. But at the moment, as I said, 2.6 cents, 2.7 cents is the current marker. We have retraced since the last movements of the last few days, and we're starting to attack this 2.7 fib level. There is an anticipation in my mind that because of the RSIs on the bottom left here, now around the 50 marks, we're at the middle ground. There's an opportunity for us to swing back and retest that higher area. However, with the generalization of it being towards the end of December, people are a bit conscious about money, etc. My anticipation is that we'll stick around here potentially for some stability and potentially try and retest this previous low of 2.2 cents at some point. I do think we still need to do that, just to have one final clarity from those Elliott waves aspects to try and push ourselves back up into the forward orientation. The other things to consider as well, of course, the Bitcoin ETFs, the halving events, the interest rates next year. There's going to be a lot of fluctuating patterns between now and then for sure. And I think with this massive uprise that we've had, and we looked at this in the last video, there's been 117% increase in the price point since around the September time. So that 3-month gap has been really lucrative for a lot of traders out there, and I'm sure many of you have taken advantage. I'm just waiting patiently for this number to come back down so I can try and accumulate some VET tokens in the lower regions again. But the performance indicators on the right hand side here are suggesting that that could potentially be happening because of the fact that we are a good 70% up in the 6 months. We're a good halfway there on the 3 month as well. So there's still a bit of movement, and that kind of orientates around the RSIs here as well, that there is an opportunity for us to do definitely swing back upwards as a possibility. But equally also, there's a lot of downward opportunity from the longer term spectrums as well to do these retests. So that's why I've got my buy orders still at these low areas. I've still got buy orders, guys, at 1.7 and the lower regions of 2 cents as well. But I do have a feeling that I should probably add another one around this point here. It's not financial advice, just opinion and what I'm doing personally. But I'm really interested to know out there, guys, what you're doing with your VET tokens. You've been accumulating, waiting for these drops. Have you had all your successes in the last few months? There's a lot more to come, guys. And generally speaking, if you're purchasing at 2 cents or 3 cents, of course, in the long run, depending on how much you accumulate, always has a difference. But the fact of the matter is, even if we get to those previous all-time highs of what, 30, I think it was 27 cents, around about 30 cents nearly, there's a substantial amount of return on investment potential in this project, and very exciting to see how this trademark develops. But guys, that's wrapping up the Vechain video. As I said, let me know your thoughts and comments below. We look forward to talking about Vechain again in the near future. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.